Hey, housewives.
Hey, welcome back.
Welcome back. This is a man I so admire. I mean, he's just listening to him and his accent.
I know.
It's just I could listen to him talk all day. He has been a follower of Christ since he was 7,
Mhm.
and never in a million years did he think that he would be on this journey. And he checks all the boxes with his kiddos
Yeah.
of going to church and doing all the things. And yet his life took a completely different direction.
Yeah, Darryl talks about his walking through supporting his son through addiction, seeking help, bringing him home, thinking things are better. And unfortunately, he lost his son in a car accident, but he was not the driver, he was the passenger.
Hmm.
And the story is so tragic as they continue healing from the death of his son. And then they lost the driver of the car a few months later due to taking her own life. And he has turned all of his, suffering and journey into a mission. And he is out there speaking and coaching and encouraging families who are walking through caring for someone who has struggled with an addiction.
And he is shedding light of all of the stigmas that we have,
Mhm.
and trying to break that barrier of what addiction is and what it means for the family. Because it's not just finding the person struggling with addiction help, but finding that support system for the family and those who love and who are the caretakers of that individual. And so we absolutely hope that this is helpful.
Mhm. This is for the one who has been affected by addiction.
Hey, housewives.
Hey, welcome back.
Welcome back. Welcome back. We are so excited to bring another topic that I, gosh, I mean, God has just blessed us with some incredible resources and guests for this summer series. And we are just in awe of how, in his goodness, of we had an idea that came together and then he just put the people right in front of us, which that's kind of awesome and you make it easy.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have Tracy introduce our guests.
Yes. Okay. Well, today we have Darryl Rogers with us. He is a speaker, author, and a family recovery coach living in Cary, North Carolina. As a family recovery coach, he specializes in working with parents of children struggling with a substance use disorder. Daryl's experience in family recovery came from his own family story. The oldest of his two boys, Chase, attended college on a football scholarship. He dropped out in second semester of his freshman year after developing a drug addiction. When Daryl first learned of Chase's drug habit, he didn't know anything about substance use disorders, and he shares of his panic and the mistakes he went through as a parent. At the age of 20, Chase died in a drug impaired wreck. He was a passenger in the front seat of his own car, and the 18-year-old driver took her own life 7 months later. After Chase died, Daryl immersed himself in learning everything he could about substance use disorders, drug and alcohol addiction. He's written a book about Chase's life and began doing drug prevention speaking. There's no cure for a substance use disorder, but he has discovered steps parents can take to give their child the best opportunity at recovery. Welcome to the Unlikely Housewives, Daryl.
Thank you, Tracy and Tori. Really good to be with you today.
Thank you so much. We are, again, I mean, this was an idea that we had a couple of months ago, early in the year. And we were just like, let's talk about all the hard, tough topics and that our communities are not, whether that be people don't feel safe or they don't want to feel judged. They don't want to reach out for help. They don't want to ask for help, or they don't want, like we have this little picture perfect of what we're supposed to look like as Christians, right? And then when something goes, you know, I goes the opposite direction, how dare we bring that into the community? So tell us a little bit about the life that, I mean, your family raised in church, and the background of Chase, he knew God and that situation from where he was coming from.
Right. Yeah. Well, to start with, my dad was a Southern Baptist preacher, and I grew up in South Carolina. in a rural community. Outdoorsman, loved hunting and fishing, fished with my dad in local farm ponds, and that was, I mean, I became a Christian when I was 7 years old, and you go, well, how do you know enough at seven? But I did. I understood, and I just had a really good example of a Christian walk. My parents not only taught the talk, my dad was a good pastor, but I saw the example in the way they lived their lives
Mhm.
every day. And so I did my best. I feel like I fell short of the mark, but I
We
did
all
my
do.
best.
I think that's we all do. We all feel
Yeah,
feel
that's
short,
right. Yeah.
right?
So, but it's like when you're raising a child, there's so many things that you just don't know until you get into the middle of it,
Mhm.
and you think you got it figured out. And I tell people a lot of times that I got past the terrible twos and all of that, and as my kids were getting a little bit older, I'm thinking, yeah, I think I got this parenting thing figured out. And then the teenage years came along, it was like starting all over again. I didn't know anything.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, both of our boys, raised, going to church. Both of them got saved, and just, typical Christian family, in church on a regular basis. But then things got a little crazy, got a little sideways, with Chase.
Yeah. And that you from your bio and just from our previous conversation, you have said this is a lot of pressure in football. There was a lot of things that obviously led to it. Did you notice in high school that there was any substance abuse issues? And, just from a like leading question, if parents are sitting there listening to this episode,
Mhm.
like how did you know? Did you miss something or was it really just that like holy cow slap in the face moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's not an easy one to answer because it wasn't like there was no defining moment that, oh, Chase has a substance use disorder,
Mhm.
or an addiction. Early on, in the 10th grade, middle of the 10th grade, he was beginning to I began to notice some changes in him that were pretty drastic. He was failing a class, and he had never failed any classes before. All of his grades were plummeting, and he was becoming more rebellious at home. I was noticing a little bit of difference in the crowd that he was hanging with more, the way he dressed, just a little different. It was just a combination of everything that all these red flags were popping up for me. And Chase had been diagnosed ADD, ADHD when he was younger. We did not want to put him on any medication, and we resisted that for a while, but we saw he was going to have a really tough time in school if we did not. And we always kept him on the lowest possible dosage. And compared to a lot of other kids, I've seen the whole spectrum.
Mhm.
He
Right.
was he was on the bottom end of that spectrum most of the time, but so we kept his dosage really low. But sometimes he would get a little hyper and definitely had some attention, some focus issues in class. So, but otherwise, I mean, Chase is a really good kid, quiet, easygoing. But now, I'm seeing all of these changes with him. All of a sudden, I caught him in some lies on a few things. It's just some inappropriate things going on with his cell phone, with texting some
Mhm.
girls and back and forth, things like that. And I'm like, when I confronted him about it, caught him in some lies, and he had never lied to me about anything before, and said that those were just more red flags going up for me. And just with the combination of everything over a period of time, I decided that I thought it would be good for him to attend a military school. And I, you know, I had already tried having conversations with him by this point, and I had pretty much exhausted everything else that I thought I could do. And I didn't have any concrete evidence at this point that he was using any drugs or anything or alcohol. I suspected that he might be, and to this day, I can't tell you for sure. He told his mother that he started when he was in military school. He transferred the middle of his junior year to a military school and finished up there. He did improve his grades. He still got into some trouble while he was there, and but nothing real serious. But he did finish up, did graduate on time, and had a really good year of football his senior year. And then, but when he got to college, I mean, I was already kind of watching him like a hawk, by
Yeah.
the point. Yeah, when he got to his freshman year of college, it just, wheels started to fall off. He was attending out of state, and they redshirted him his first year of football, so no playing time. But he just had too much time on his hands, and he had freedom that he had not experienced before. And so,
Mhm.
anyway, that's when I really knew that we had a problem.
Yep. And so I guess one of the questions that comes to my mind is when you approached him with military school, clearly that wasn't something that he probably was like, "Yes, let me go on
Right.
the next, phase." Was it something that he knew it was going to be in the best interest, of his success, or was there pushback there too?
No, there was definitely pushback there. When I say there was pushback, you have to understand that, my boys are different. They're just like so different. Like Chase he was easygoing, laid back, and so he would kind of go along to get along. And, there were a lot of things that in hindsight now I can look back and say, oh, well, Chase just did that to make dad happy, but it wasn't really what he wanted to do. And that was definitely one of those things. He was not happy about giving up his friends,
Mhm.
and going off to military school. But at the time, I thought he was okay with it. And from I will say this: I know he loved playing football, and I know he had a great senior year of football, and he would not have gotten the playing time at the school he was at,
Yeah.
that he got at that military school. And so it gave him an opportunity to really shine on the football field. And he loved every minute of that part of it. So, and he made new friends there quickly. And
Mhm.
he actually, in some respects, it was like sending him from the fire into the frying pan. There's some really good kids that go to military schools that are there because they want to get into a service academy, but
Sure.
there are a lot of kids coming there with some troubled backgrounds too. And he gravitated to those kids. They gravitated to him, and it just wasn't a good situation for him, really, in a lot of respects.
When he was in college and he started to have some of the setbacks, I know part of your story, so correct me if we're missing a piece, but you brought him home to go to a recovery facility, is that correct?
Y It didn't go quite like that, but that's how it panned out. He dropped out, and then basically he was kicked out of college because his grades were so bad. He came home on the Christmas break and he was on academic probation. And I talked to him then, like, you sure you want to get back to college? You can just, I can, there's a lot of other options. And I started listing out some of those options for him and things that I could help him with. And no, he wanted to go back, but, I know now that his main reason he wanted to go back, and I suspected then, was that he just wanted to party.
Mm.
And so, he did go back after that Christmas break, and then, yeah, the wheels just came off. He got kicked out of the school, and he did come back home. And after he moved in at home, once he dropped out of college and moved back in at home, that's when he would just be gone for days at a time, and we wouldn't know where he was, what he was doing, who he was with. But I knew it wasn't good, any of it. And there did come a point in time where I locked him out of the house. He had been gone for several days. We had already made it clear what the rules were. Like, look, you're not working, you're not going to school, and you're just laying around doing nothing. And then, you go out. When you go out, if you're going to live with us, then one of the rules is you have to let us know where you are,
Yeah.
or at least give us some idea of where you are and when we can expect you back. And he wouldn't do that. So I did lock him out one day, and that was hard. But
That's I mean, my parents, there was a brief time in my life where it was a possibility of moving back in with my parents, and it
Mhm.
was my house, my rules. And I think that's absolutely, I mean, respectable and understandable and I ended up not moving back in with my parents because of my house, my rules.
Right.
Because I was like, well, I'm not gonna just make us all miserable.
Mhm.
So, but that is, yeah, it was as a parent, like that is absolutely understandable to say, no, like you're not just,
Yeah.
you don't get to do whatever you want here, you know.
Yeah.
A question that I've got is, what are some of the differences in the way you would advise a parent to handle that, like the college age years versus a child that is in high school and underage? Like, so
Mhm.
far,
Mhm.
we've seen him a little bit of both. We went off to military school hoping that that would help. Not, don't think it solved the problem, but and then college. What would you advise for parents under 18 versus their independent selves?
Well, it gets a little bit tricky there with teenagers. First thing I would say with a teenager, do not have a knee jerk reaction if you believe that they are using drugs, or you suspect that they're using drugs, or if you find out and you confirm it. You don't want, I mean, I think it's a typical thing for parents to just go off on them, and just say, "What are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" And that is not a good. You need to, like, take a deep breath, calm down, and make sure you're in a good headspace before you have that conversation. Because the reason being, you don't want to drive a wedge there. You want there to be open communication so you can get as much information from them as possible.
Mhm.
And when I say get information, you don't want it to be like the Spanish Inquisition, but you want to just, like, gradually, ask them kind of open-ended questions, not all at once, but a little bit here and a little bit there, to try to gather as much information as you can, because information is really powerful in those situations. And you want to create an open atmosphere so they will feel as comfortable as they can coming to you and telling you what's going on, because until it's just a little bit, it's kind of difficult to deal with. If you suspect that they're using drugs and they're a teenager, then you can do a drug test. You can send it to the doctor, or you can have a drug test done professionally. And then, the way you handle that, if they are, it could be quite different. They don't get to choose. If they're under 18, they don't get to choose whether or not they go to treatment.
Mhm.
And in some cases, inpatient treatment may not be necessary. You may be able to just start with intensive outpatient care, or individualized therapy. As you really need to consult at that point, you really need to consult a professional.
Yeah, especially underage. I mean, they're at the point
Yeah,
of, like, brains aren't even fully developed. I mean, they're even in college, you're still at that age of, again, you're able
right.
to legally at 21, but it doesn't mean that problems can't occur even before or even at the age of 21 of, like, already have created the addiction within their systems. And so, yeah, I think that's something we've heard, obviously, of just a few situations where kids go, get recovery, come home. But I think the one thing that you speak to is what the family's role is after when they come
Yeah,
home.
yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because, that's one of the mistakes that I made, and I do try to encourage parents, like, I try to use the stories from the things I did right and the things I didn't do right. There are things I could have done better to help parents learn. Yeah, so if when they go to treatment, even if we're talking about a teenager, it's usually not best if they move back in at home right away. And when we're talking about teenagers, there is an option called recovery high schools. There are not a lot of them out there yet, but they're beginning to get um, more. They're beginning to be more and more of them. And I would encourage parents to take a look at that if they can afford it. As coming out of treatment, they have to have successfully completed a treatment program to be able to enroll in a recovery high school. But if they're going from, if they go to a treatment program and then they go right back into the high school that they left, they're going to find there's the same drug suppliers, the same group of friends, and there. I mean, the chances of success there are not great. And the same is true with an adult child. If you have an adult child, where I messed up was one of the best things I did was have an intervention because it interrupted everything and it stopped me from doing some of the things I was doing in terms of enabling, rescuing behaviors, things like
Mhm.
that, that were preventing him from being able to move ahead with his life. But the intervention was a good thing. It got him into treatment. Things were moving along well, but then I allowed him to move back in after treatment, and he had gotten kicked out of a sober living home, and he moved back in, and that was not good. It just sets up the stage. If the parents have not, especially if they haven't had training, haven't been educated, they don't know how to communicate with their child who's battling addiction. It's just there are a lot of triggers there that can happen that will cause them to return to use or maybe have a relapse.
What did that intervention look like for you and Chase and your family?
Yeah, it was scary, and I think every intervention is scary for parents and for families, but it was a very emotional. It was a very emotional event. There was not a dry eye in the room. Everybody was crying, including Chase. And I just did an intervention myself for a family recently. That's something I've just started doing in the last couple of years. And same thing, young man, 28 years old, and I mean everybody's crying, including him. But there was a lot of things that happened after he left college and had moved back in for a little while. And basically, he left for a while and was staying with a young woman. And then he had moved back in temporarily. Anyway, a lot of things that happened there.
Mhm.
But we had the intervention, and there was like 6 of us. I think there were 6 of us in total in the room. Myself and my wife and our youngest son, Justin, and a couple of family friends and the interventionist and one of Chase's best friends, and it started with her, and she read her letter. Chase's best friend, not nothing romantic, just good friends, but a female his age, and she read her letter, and it just went all the way around the room. Everybody had intervention letters that had been prepared in advance, and they read their letters. And he the whole time he was saying, "No, not going. I'm not going. You guys are crazy. I don't have a drug problem." Very typical. I've learned, and
Denial? Yeah.
oh, yeah, and then we got to the end of it, and the interventionist began handling some of his objections and began showing him where he would go to treatment. He gave him a laptop to look at, or I think I used my laptop, and he's looking at the place where he's going to go. And he finally agreed to go, but it was just to get us off of his back, and he went to his room to pack his bags, and I followed him in there because the interventionist told me to keep an eye on him. But then he went to the bathroom
Mm.
and wasn't going to follow him into the bathroom. He ended up jumping out of the bathroom window. He locked the door, turned the water on, and I knew when I heard the water turn on, I knew
Yeah.
he went out the bathroom window. So, but he was only gone. He was gone about an hour and ended up coming back and agreeing to go to treatment, and he did. So that's part of the ADHD thing, which a lot of them are ADHD, and just he was impulsive. Part of
Mhm.
that impulsivity, but he did go to treatment. I think that was one of the best things that happened out of all of that. He wasn't ready for sober living. He went to a 30-day program. What I would encourage parents to do in this situation, send your child to a longer term program if there's any way you can afford it. And there are some that are more cost effective, but you really need at least a 60 to 90-day program. And then from there into sober living and then step down to IOP, intensive outpatient care. But yeah, it was the 30-day program just was not enough for him. And so when that guy called me from the sober living house and said, "Hey, you need to come pick up your son," I didn't know any better. I went, but what he should have said, I know now in hindsight, is that, "Hey, your son needs a higher level of care
Oh.
and he needs to go back into inpatient treatment." But anyway, that's, I guess that answered your question.
Yeah. So Now tell us, when the evening of the accident,
Mhm.
Chase was out with some friends to
Yeah.
to say goodbye, correct? Like, because he was
Yeah, it really wasn't a good group of friends he was hanging with. Yeah, it was a lot of the friends that were he was using drugs with, and so apparently there was a going away party that was, before him. He was saying goodbye, and there were all kind of drugs and alcohol consumed at that party. So they woke up late the next morning feeling hungover, and they decided, hey, let's go to a park and we'll smoke some weed in the park to help cope with our nausea. And I've never seen all of the police reports. Not sure I want to look at them anymore at this point,
Mhm.
but I did see some of them, and I know that they did go to the park and they did smoke the weed or marijuana there in the park. And they all smoked together, including the driver. And the driver was a girl that he had dated, that he had lived with for a little while. She was an 18-year-old that did not have a driver's license, did not seem to think that that mattered. And, she got behind the wheel of his car. I don't know what transpired there that he allowed her to get behind the wheel of his car, but he got in the front passenger seat and another young man got in the back seat and they left the park. I think they were headed to a local mall. So they didn't make it but a few miles, and she lost control of Chase's car in a curb, running about 70, left the road, hit a tree. Chase died at the scene. It took him about an hour to get the three of them out of the car.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
The piece of the story that I want you to share is I'm not going to say coincidence because that's not, I mean, we kind of
Right.
don't use that word, but the the car came from his
My dad,
your dad.
grandfather. Yeah.
There was a Bible in the car,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and there was something in the glove box,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And well, I'll save this part for later. There's one piece of the story that I haven't told yet. And I'll try to get to later. But yeah, it was my dad's car. It was a car that he had bought in his later years, low mileage. It was just a little Toyota Corolla, and low mileage, garage, handled with care. And so my mother had left a handwritten note that Chase was to get the car. And my brother had power of attorney. So he settled the estate, and when he did, I think he sort of saw the handwriting on the wall, older brother, and so he, instead of signing the title over to Chase, he signed it over to me. So my name was on the title, and there's a whole nother story behind all of that.
Yeah.
But I had withheld the car from Chase for a while, and I had eventually signed the title over to him. But yeah, it was my dad's car, and there was a Bible that belonged to him in the trunk of the car with sermon notes in it, ironically. I did not discover that until the car was released later to me. And there was also a medallion that I gave Chase in the dash. The police had asked me, "Is there anything of value in the car that you would like us to look for?" And right after the wreck, because they confiscated the car basically to hold for evidence in case they decided to. They did press charges against the driver, but the charges were contingent upon you know, the toxicology report. So anyway, they were supposed to look for this medallion that I had given Chase, and I told them, don't worry too much about it because it's not there's not a lot of monetary value. I just like to know if he had it or not because I don't see it anywhere. And they couldn't find it. And when the car was released to me, it was in December, really cold out, and I went with a friend to search the car to look for the medallion, and it was in a little compartment at the bottom of the dash right in front of the gear shift lever with a little spring-loaded door. The only dry spot in the car, everything else was, like, soaking wet because the top had been removed to get them out of the car.
Mhm. Yeah.
And, anyway, it was in perfect condition, and I still have the medallion to this day, and it was, it had let's see, is that Ephesians 4:16, I believe. I don't know if I'm getting the scripture verse right, which is bad, but
That's okay, you're
I've
on the
never been
spot.
good at the numbers, but it's about putting on the full armor of God.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's, you know, it's Paul talking about putting on the full armor of God. And I gave that to him just weeks prior to the crash because it was just a message I was trying to send him about, how I hoped that he would live his life. Yeah.
Well, tell us how because you were talking about the driver and
Yeah.
being pressing charges, whether depending on the toxicology report. But sadly, before the the charges were ever official or she was brought to court, she took her own life.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'll say it this way, according to the fire chief and his department's investigation, they believe that she poured gasoline all over the floor of her apartment and stood in the middle of it and ignited it. And there were two suicide notes that were found, one online and one that was a handwritten note, apparently, that survived the fire. I never saw that, but her mother told me about that one.
And was it because of the guilt? Or what part of the guilt or fearful of the charges or
I
I mean,
think it was, I can't say for sure because I know she didn't spell it out. The online note was very cryptic and I've never seen the other note, but all of the people who were really close to her seemed to believe that it was because of the guilt. The charges against her, I don't know if she really knew this or not, but she should have. I'm sure she had a lawyer, but the charges against her she was not going to get much time because it's very difficult to prove. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to prove impairment in a court of law when the impairment is via THC. And that gives there's a lot of science behind all of that, but it's metabolized in the body differently than alcohol, and law enforcement just does not have a good means right now of testing for THC impairment roadside.
yeah. I only bring that up. I mean, it's because it it's when something happens like that, it impacts so many more lives. It's a ripple
Yeah,
effect.
yeah,
Mhm.
And it wasn't just, obviously your family and, your heart is crushed losing Chase. And then, but even just months later, a whole other family lost their child because of the situation of, you know, that's, I can't.
there there's a whole ripple effect there that I haven't even touched on yet. But when we had the visitation for Chase and the funeral, at the visitation there was just a line of people out the door at the funeral home, and a lot of them were kids Chase's age, and I could see them in the line, coming, and they were all crying, and I didn't realize how many people, have been impacted, and the uncle of the driver lived in another country, their home country, and close to his niece, and when he found out he died in his apartment from a, heart attack, and her pictures were scattered around him on the floor of the apartment. That's the story she told me.
Ugh.
So it's just, yeah, there's this huge ripple effect, and you do see that,
Mhm.
with especially with such a tragic death, that was avoidable.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and I think, it's tragedy is one thing, and it can absolutely have the ripple effect.
mhm.
You have taken that tragedy and you have put your energy into actually helping other families get through the hard part in which you didn't have someone for. And so now you're taking that and you are a coach that is doing interventions, meeting with people, speaking, and hopefully preventing some other families from going through what you have been through. So tell us how you took that step and putting the one foot in front of the other afterwards to get to where you are now.
It has been a journey. It has been a 10-year journey, I never thought I would end up here, and what's really cool and interesting about it is some of the people that I'm really close to now that I really think a lot of are people who are recovered addicts. And, I was very judgmental, especially of Chase's friends. I felt like who were a bad influence on him. And I did not understand addiction. So very judgmental in the beginning. And, these other people that I'm talking about are interventionists, with 12, 13 years of experience doing interventions, not to mention, I've been in recovery probably 15 or 16 years plus. And man, they are so cool to hang out with and are really good at what they do and have trained me. And it was just taking everything I do the next level. But it is exactly what you said, just putting one foot in front of the other. And then God just opened up doors. In the beginning, I wrote a book about Chase, and the book was titled A Life Half Lived. It started out just to be a journal because I didn't want to forget some of Chase's childhood memories and who he was, and I wanted the people around us to have those stories. And I just decided to publish it. And when people read it, if they read it with the understanding that I was a grieving dad who did not understand addiction, it'll make a lot more sense to people. But it does seem to have resonated with a lot of people. But I just went from that into I got invited to do some speaking. And I would say too, early on when I was doing the speaking, I was mostly sharing Chase's story, but I still didn't have a good didn't have an understanding about addiction. And what I would say to the listeners out there is that, man, the family has more power than you think. The family is the key. And I like to say that the big secret to recovery from addiction is the family. And it's when the family understands their proper role in the recovery process that everything changes. You have to learn to let go of the outcome and trust God. You have to learn to not get engaged in controlling behaviors that, as a parent in this situation, you end up in fear for your child's life, and that
Mhm,
draws you into these controlling attempts to control your child,
mhm. Yeah.
and that never goes over well. It makes the situation worse. So there's a lot of education that parents need to get. They find themselves in the situation, and they need accountability. But yeah, so I just started, facilitating a peer support group for parents. I've done that for 8 years, and then into family recovery coaching, and then bumped into the interventionist online, and that's kind of been my path. But it's healing for me. It's not just that I'm trying to help other people. I am, but in doing that, it's healing for me.
Yeah. One of the things that I remember you saying, and we've referenced this story a few times, so I want you to tell it. When you give a message, when you go and you speak, you talk about the referencing in Genesis 3 of Adam and Eve hiding. So can you
Yeah.
tell your just a brief version of that?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, really, there's a friend that I have that invited me to speak, and that's his whole thing. He's got a book all on that, and it's about, he calls it Stop Hiding, Start Healing. And really, we all have a tendency to want to hide our sins and our problems or whatever you want to call it, our dysfunction, it all comes back down to sin.
Yeah.
But instead of dealing with it, I mean, you go back to Adam and Eve with the first thing that they did when God confronted them was they went and they ran and hid. And we all have a tendency to do that. We've inherited that sin nature. We've also inherited that tendency to go and hide. And there's just a lot of power in being able to talk about your problems. So whatever is safe for you in doing that, maybe it's with a therapist, a counselor, or is it your pastor? Is it getting into a support group? Support groups are really good now, and there's a lot of them out there that are specific towards family recovery and addiction. And so that's what I recommend. One of the things I recommend for parents, you have to be able to talk about it to be able to heal.
Mhm.
So, how has the church I mean, in the big C church,
Mm,
can we be better about, like, making it a comfortable space for families to, say, "Hey, look, just want to let you know our child is going through addiction, and we're recovering from we're trying to figure out the pieces." Like, because that's essentially, it's not their sin directly, right? But it is they're hiding because they're like, "Oh, well, everybody will judge." So how can we as a church be better supportive, and or what can we encourage our church leaders to do,
mm.
to make this not be such a topic that we don't, oh, we're not,
Address.
yeah, address or talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think talk about it more, make it just be more open about it and encourage people, especially from the leaders coming from the leadership, encourage people to find those places where they can talk about it. I think, there are programs like Celebrate Recovery out there
Mhm.
in a lot of churches. I think it has changed. It is getting better where people are talking about it more. I think people need to realize, understand that church is, and Jesus talked about this, that, not specifically about church, but he's just said, he came to heal those who are, they need a physician, right? If
Mhm.
somebody doesn't need if they're not sick, they don't need a doctor, right? But we all live in a broken world. We all are live in a fallen world. We all have something that we could need to work on, right? And so, when we go to church, we tend to think that, oh, we have to look our best, and we've got, and people get into this little mindset of
Country club versus hospital.
right, yeah, it is more like that, right? And it needs to be more like, no, no, everybody here is sick, and
Mhm.
spiritually sick, and we come to church to get healing. And so I think that happens a lot of times with people. They get hurt by someone at church, and then they're like, well, I'm not going back to church. I'm like, well, the person that hurt you was hurting,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and so we have to, I'm not saying it's okay, but I'm saying that we need to be a little bit, we need to understand that, people at church are not perfect, and
Mhm.
so we have to be willing to kind of meet people where they are and kind of overlook some things so that we can get the healing that we need and be an instrument of healing for others too.
When it comes to church hurt, I mean, I know it's a real thing. I compare it to people like, you had a bad burger. Like, you go to one restaurant, you had a bad burger, it wasn't good.
Right.
Okay. Like, but that doesn't mean all the other hamburgers in the world are
Right.
not great. Like, you can go and find a burger that is just your style, and, so don't give up on, the church just because of one situation, one person who's a sinner just like us.
Mhm.
That's right.
That's the hard part.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well, one more question before we wrap up. You are a coach now. You work with people, you go, you speak. How, if someone were to come to you, like again, obviously they are dealing with maybe someone that they love, they're in their family, they're close to. How do they know, like, I don't know what to do now? Like, how do they know they need someone like you? Because not very often do we like to ask for help, you know?
Right.
And I
yeah.
think you it's always hindsight's 2020. Like, you would have done it when, right? Like, how would you have gone and sought someone like you?
I'll tell you what I did. I went to Google and I Googled the word intervention,
Mhm.
because I had just come across the show just enough times, never watched much of it, but I had the idea of what an intervention was, or I thought I did. I can tell you an in-person intervention is nothing like the show intervention. It's not, it's a very loving, compassionate type thing. It's anyway, but But yeah, as far as
Well,
that,
that doesn't make for good TV drama,
that's
Darryl.
right.
They probably have the loving, like, "Great, you guys all love each other, that's fantastic, but this will never see the light of day. Let's go to this family over here that's yelling at everybody." So,
Right.
yeah, right.
There can definitely be some drama, but yeah, it's not like what you see on TV. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times families do wait, unfortunately, until they're in a crisis situation to reach out to someone like me. And in those situations, a lot of times an intervention is needed. I will say this: I work with I mentioned earlier that I work with this group of interventionists, and we use a platform called Intervention on Call. And families can book a session on there for $150 for a 1 hour session. And we start out with the intent of equipping those families to do their own intervention. And sometimes they'll need two or three of those calls. And sometimes, at the end of it, they figure things out without ever having to have an intervention, or they're able to do their own intervention, or they still hire one of us to come and do the intervention for them. But those sessions that they've had were great planning sessions to
Yeah.
get things organized for the intervention. So it's a really good concept. That one's not mine. That one's not my concept. Aside from that, I do what I started doing first was the family recovery coaching, and I've created a year-long program for parents to really get the training that they need to be able to communicate better. It's all about communication and setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, learning how to control their own emotions, because the reason that the boundaries break down a lot of times is the parent falls prey to manipulation tactics from their addicted child because they're just not strong enough. They can't control their emotions. So I work with them on that. So those are some of the things that I do, to help them. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No, that was good because
Yeah.
again, it's just awareness of there's a resource,
Mm.
start with a phone call. Maybe that's the first step in your own growth as a parent. Maybe it's just talking to someone safe who's walked through something like this and say, I want to strangle my kid. I yell at him, her all the time. Like, I don't even know how to communicate, so it just is as simple as someone picking up the phone or an email and giving you a call and saying, "Okay, here's where I'm at. Here's what I need." And you can plug them either into your program or send them resources or local resources. Because I do think, I mean, obviously, our hope in doing the entire summer series is just putting this in front of people to say you're not alone in what you're going through. Everybody's story may be unique, but it's not special. Like this happens. These are things that we go through. And as a community, we need to support you in. And so that, I mean, you answered our question and you're being so vulnerable and sharing your story. And we thank you for, I
Thank
can't imagine
you.
even over all these years, how hard it is to relive it. But it is hopefully, like you said, healing to an
It is,
extent.
yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate you having me on. They can go to my website, which is thefamilyrecoverycoach.com. They can find information there. And I'm always about, when I can, I try to offer free resources to people too. Sometimes families just can't afford much,
Right. Yeah.
and so I offer free resources where I can to help people. So, but yeah, they can start out with a phone call if they want to. And I mean, you can put my number up there. I don't care. I'm good with that. But a lot of times it's just a 20-minute phone conversation, and then we decide where we want to go from there.
Yeah. Well, like Tracy said, we just want to say thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your story with us and Chase's story.
Mhm.
And hopefully parents and listeners from this can either start picking up on those red flags and making different choices or getting more educated on how to better communicate with their children and or the addict in their family, that it's where it doesn't have the fatal outcome. like that.
Well, and in a Christian community, maybe we don't specifically have someone, but we know someone, if they're coming in your community for prayer, in your small group, in
Yeah.
your church, like that's why this conversation has to be out there. I just find that hopefully this will connect and have value. And we always say if it helps one person, then we're doing our job.
Yep.
Yeah,
Very true.
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much
Yes,
for your
thank
time,
you.
Darryl. We appreciate it. And that's it for today, housewives. Until
Until
next
next
time.
time. Bye.
Bye.